Well, this is the culmination of an effort that goes back decades, but in practical terms, at least to 2011, of the United States to bring down Assad. And this is at the behest of Israel. So this is really a U.S., Israel, Turkey operation. Of course, Turkey has somewhat different aims to extend its own power and to fight the Kurds, which the U.S. supports. So we're not at the end of that story. But this is essentially a U.S., Israel, a Turkish operation. This isn't something that just happened because of Turkey or something that just happened because of HTS internally or just the collapse of the Assad government. This is a long-standing effort. The reason that it occurred so rapidly, it seems clear in retrospect, is because of the weakening of Hezbollah in recent weeks, which, of course, was the target of Israel's arms in southern Lebanon. But it seems clear that the Hezbollah forces that were supporting Assad pulled out of Syria to reinforce Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that created the opening for HTS and for the Israelis from the south to move in and invade Syria. So this is, of course, interconnected with Israel's broader war. And Israel's expansion into Syria is also consistent with Israel's broader war, which is to recreate the Middle East under Israel's regional power and ultimately to defeat Iran, which has been Netanyahu's strategic aim for decades, and this is a part of that longer-term effort. So the U.S. talking to the other side and so forth, this is not something that's just happened or the U.S. is catching up with events. This is a coordinated U.S., Israel, Turkish operation. And it's a major event, but it almost surely opens the way to a wider war and to more instability and to the carving up of Syria rather than to some new, stable, peaceful, democratic government. Dream on.
Let me dig deeper on that. Depending on which media outlet or government spokesperson one listens to, some describe HTS as an opposition force or simply as a Syrian group, while others use the terms such as rebels or jihadists. In Western media, we're currently seeing round-the-clock images and videos of people on the streets celebrating the fall of Assad and creating a narrative of a people-led grassroots revolution that just successfully overthrew an authoritarian regime. What is largely missing, however, is the background of HTS's leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who is one of the founding leaders of Al-Qaeda in Syria, al-Nusra, and a former deputy to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. According to Amnesty International, HTS was responsible for the systematic killing of entire families in Alawite areas of Latakia. Al-Jolani recently gave an exclusive interview to CNN in which he presented himself as a modern man and stated that he has transformed himself since the early days when he was in his 20s. Although HTS is still on the terror list of the US, the UK, Turkey, as well as the UN, they're now being welcomed approach, as I mentioned earlier. Is this a similar policy that the US played, for example, in Afghanistan? And do you think this could possibly backfire not only against Israel, but also against the United States, given that these people have come to power?
What we see on the social media may have absolutely no reality to it on the street. So nothing that we're just seeing clicking on CNN, God forbid, or some other mainstream media shows us anything. We can remember the celebrations of the fall of Saddam Hussein, the celebrations of the fall of Gaddafi and so forth. It's not hard to stage 50 people celebrating, waving flags, and maybe they are waving flags. But I would be very surprised if we don't see a lot of bloodshed and a lot of war in Syria in the days ahead. Now, the fact that al-Jolani is part of Al Qaeda means that he's been on the CIA payroll. That's all. This is the CIA operation. The whole attempt to bring down Assad from 2011 was Al Qaeda. Of course, there are occasionally breakaway groups like ISIS, which may not be on CIA payroll, or actually may be on CIA payroll. We never quite know. It's not like the books are open and that there's a shred of honesty to any of it. But the CIA MO of using radical jihadists dates back at least to 1979. It may have been an innovation in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen. Maybe it was even before that. You know, the Soviet Union on its southern rim is Muslim to a large extent. This means that the CIA back to the 1940s was working with Islamic groups and Islamic militant groups to try to destabilize the Soviet Union. Remember that the core of the CIA, going back now to its founding in 1947, is to try to destroy Russia or the Soviet Union. And that basic goal has not changed. The end of the Cold War didn't really change very much. It went from a fight against the Soviet Union to an attempt to dismantle, or as they say in Washington, decolonize Russia itself. That's why we have war in Ukraine. That's why the war in Ukraine is not disconnected from the Middle East. This has been the CIA MO for decades. And whenever you see jihadists, think CIA. You know, this is what's going on. And that's not some crazy talk. This is contracts. We know it. This is Osama bin Laden. It gets embarrassing once in a while for these people. They don't like when the American contractors turn around and blow up Americans, but that's part of the operations, actually, it turns out. So, yes, al-Jilani no doubt has been part of this U.S., Israel, Turkish gambit going way back. Al-Nusra, we know, was part of Turkey's operation. We know that Operation Timber Sycamore, that was an Obama era finding to overthrow Assad, directly involved jihadists. So there's nothing new under the sun in this.
So how do you think this will look out geopolitically? Russia has lost its naval base there. Turkey has posed a threat now with this group against the Kurds. Iran has been further weakened. Do you think Western hegemony, led by the United States, has made significant gains here, and that would in some ways stabilize the region? Or do you think we are heading for an all-out war?
I think most likely we're seeing an expanding war. I don't think the long-term trends are towards Western hegemony. Russia will win in Ukraine, or we'll get an escalation to nuclear war, depending on how crazy the Americans are. And the war in the Middle East shows no sign of tamping down. Remember that all of the wars in the Middle East that we've seen since the 1990s are a Netanyahu strategy. Actually, it seems weird, and it seems how can one say that? But actually, if you look at the list in Netanyahu's book in 1996, Fighting Terrorism, or you look at the clean break strategy, which was U.S. political consultants advising or drafting Netanyahu's game plan in 1996, or you look at the list of countries that the Bush administration planned to conquer after 9/11, this is a long-standing playbook. There's a famous episode of General Wesley Clark, the former NATO commander, being shown a piece of paper just after 9/11 in 2001, when Clark was at the Pentagon, And the paper said we're going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. And the list was Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Iran, Somalia, Libya, and Sudan. Well, lo and behold, every one of those countries has been the object of a U.S. war or a U.S. proxy war since then, with one exception, partial exception, and that's Iran, which is the big prize that Israel wants, to pull the U.S. into a war with Iran, which could be easily become a world war. Now, what has happened with these 6 wars? What's the state of Libya? Ongoing civil war. What's the state of Sudan? Ongoing war and starvation. What's the state of South Sudan, which is broken apart by the CIA from Sudan? Ongoing war. What is the state of Lebanon? War. What is the state of Syria? War. What is the state of Iraq? U.S. occupation and instability. In other words, has Netanyahu's plan solved anything? Did it create Western hegemony, or did it create a bloodbath in the region? I'd go with the bloodbath interpretation. I think Israel has rather maniacally destabilized the Middle East. The U.S. pathetically has carried out Israeli foreign policy. So much of this is known and not talked about, but it's really an unpleasant reality. Netanyahu laid it out. We're going to keep control over Palestine. That's going to lead to resistance such as Hamas and Hezbollah. And we're going to take out all the governments that support the resistance movement. It was spelled out very clearly in 1996 onward. And that's what the U.S. is doing. Somehow it's not even military for rent, by the way. We fund it. It's Israel says go to war here and we go to war there. It isn't solving a single problem, but it is killing a hell of a lot of people. And I don't believe anything is going to be solved in Syria. Could be mistaken, but it would be the first time. Again, on social media, which may or may not be true, could be fake news, could be old reruns. We're now seeing postings of people being killed in cold blood. All this morning, U.S. time, we're seeing sites of people being shot in cold blood, ostensibly these hours, ostensibly in Syria. I can't verify it because nothing is verifiable very easily for me on the web. But it rings true that we're entering a period of instability. And of course, with Israel invading and saying it's not invading, and the United States saying, well, they're terrorists, but they're not terrorists. It's just an ongoing idiocy where you can't find one honest word from the US government.
I would like to draw our attention to the latest developments taking place in Ukraine. Last Saturday, President-elect Donald Trump called for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, a day after meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky and French President Macron in Paris. He made the following remarks on social media, and let me cite him here. Quote, "There should be an immediate ceasefire. Negotiation should begin. Too many lives are being needlessly wasted, too many families destroyed." Unquote. This came a day after the United States approved a $1 billion military aid package for Ukraine that includes long-term supply of weapons. What do you make of Trump's calls for a ceasefire negotiation? Is it even realistic now, given how much political capital, credibility, and even lives Zelensky and NATO invested into this conflict?
Well, if Trump were actually to follow through on the point that this Ukraine war needs to end, it can end. The way that it can end is relatively straightforward. I'd say completely straightforward, which is that Trump needs to declare NATO is not expanding to Ukraine. And on that basis, the U.S. is committed. And that doesn't mean just now or the next 5 years or the next 10 years. That's permanent. And on that basis, the fighting can stop because Russia's security interests are going to be recognized. And then the rest of the issues on territory, on demilitarization zones, on mutual security, on missile placements and other concerns can be addressed. But the core of this is the U.S. attempt to grab Ukraine as under the U.S. military alliance. This is a plan that goes back to 1994 in the Clinton and White House and was spelled out by Zbig Brzezinski in 1997 in his book, The Grand Chessboard. I often point out American foreign policy has not changed year to year by presidents. It's deep-seated. All these wars in the Middle East go back to the 1990s. The attempt to expand NATO goes back 30 years this year. So this is what we're playing out. If Trump is aware and acts on that awareness to recognize that the key to ending the war is to end the reason for the war, and that is this completely misguided U.S. hegemonic aspiration for NATO to be everywhere in the world. I say, like the board game Risk, you're trying to put your piece everywhere. This is how I characterize U.S. foreign policy. If Trump recognizes that that doesn't serve American interests, the war can end basically immediately. If instead he says, well, we need a ceasefire, and NATO's not Russia's business, or part of Ukraine will join NATO, and some of his advisors peddle such plans, the war won't stop. In other words, the war will stop if the reason for the war ends. It won't stop unless the reason for the war ends. Russia's winning on the battlefield. And so the question is whether the West will, I shouldn't say the West, whether the U.S. will escalate or whether it will remove the cause of the war. But there won't be just a ceasefire. It's not in Russia's interest.
Let us now look at Israel's assault in Gaza, where the death toll has exceeded 44,600. In November, Human Rights Watch published a report holding Israel responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this month, Amnesty International also released a report which documents how Israel is violating the Genocide Convention with specific intent to destroy Palestinians in Gaza. And let me quote their General Secretary, Agnes Callamard here. Quote, "Month after month, Israel has treated Palestinians in Gaza as a subhuman group, unworthy of human rights and dignity, demonstrating its intent to physically destroy them." Unquote. End of November, the ICC, International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as Hamas's military commander Mohammed Dev. Regarding the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, the ICC stated that they were responsible for a crime of using war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and are guilty of crimes against humanity through murder, persecution, and other human acts. The US fundamentally rejected these warrants, accusing the ICC of drawing a false equivalence between Israel and Hamas, as well as employing a flawed process to come to this conclusion. When the ICC issued arrest warrants for Russian President Putin for the war crime of the illegal deportation and transfer of children during the Russian war in Ukraine, the US welcomed it. Now that the ICC has issued arrest warrants against their ally in Benjamin Netanyahu, the US is objecting it, even though both the US and Germany rhetorically champion a rules-based order that they claim is continuously violated by actors such as Russia and China. Can you comment on the United States' reaction, as well as what the implications this will have on international justice?
The American values are that America should dominate the world. That's what the rule-based order means. It's not even anything else, because the U.S. has never, in all of this absurd propaganda, ever defined what the rules-based order is. It's like an old jingle on a commercial. Rules-based order, rules-based order. You could put it to music. It's a joke. The U.S. has no internal legal or ethical or moral consistency. When you're trying to rule the world, you overthrow governments, you launch wars, you assassinate people, and in the case of the war in Gaza, you are complicit in genocide. So the U.S. is complicit in genocide. If the ICC, had more power and would not be crushed, it could indict U.S. officials the same way. The U.S. is part of this morning till night, night till morning. It arms Israel. It provides intelligence for Israel. It provides the financing for Israel. It strategizes with Israel. It supports Israel. It vetoes resolutions in the UN. This is what it is. And yes, Israel's committing genocide and the U.S. is complicit in genocide. Will the U.S. say so? Of course not. Is it a surprise that the U.S. is duplicitous? If anyone's still surprised, sorry, you don't get it. This is the normal story of foreign policy. And there are people who defend it. It's an anarchic world and you do what you can. And it's a struggle for survival and you want to come out on top. I don't believe that that is the route to safety or security. I believe it's the route to global annihilation because it will end up in nuclear Armageddon if we continue on this path. So I'm not a fan at all of what the U.S. is doing, but I'm not surprised by it either. I mean, what has the U.S. done for 1 minute to show one iota of concern for the ruthless slaughter of tens of thousands of people? And by the way, the number of 44,000 is the count of the bodies that have been pulled from the rubble, not the estimated 10 to 15,000 whose bodies have never been recovered, nor probably another 100,000 or more of people who have died from exposure, from starvation, from lack of medical care, from lack of anesthetics for children in surgery. I mean, the scale of brutality and the scale of the loss is horrific, but it's not an accident. The government of Israel is quite straightforward, though usually in Hebrew to its own supporters, that it wants the Palestinians out of there, that it wants to make Gaza completely unlivable. It's not a secret. They don't say it in English in public when they think that someone might care what they're saying, but boy, do they say it in the rallies? Do they say it on the TikTok postings? Do they say it as these extremists celebrate the deaths of the Palestinians? And that's how the ICJ case is built. They've left a complete record of genocidal intentions, not to mention the actual genocidal outcomes. But under the convention, intentions matter, and the intentions are very clear.
To my last question, I want to specifically ask you this, as you have appeared both in the mainstream media and alternative media to comment on the most breaking political issues of our times. In your view, why is it essential today for people to support media outlets such as ours that do not take any money from corporations and government and believe in the principle of independence?
Please do so. And happy to give a shout out for you and for others trying to make real information available. I've watched the collapse of the U.S. mainstream media. The New York Times you read only to find out what absurdity they're claiming each day. You cannot read the New York Times for information. It's a propaganda page for the U.S. government. Unfortunately, this is basically true of the main cable networks when it comes to these wars. It's true of the other major print publications. Yeah, you can read them to find out what narrative the U.S. government is peddling, but you will not find the truth on them. So we need to use the ability to reach out in creative ways, such as you're doing, to bring voices of people who see things, hear things, know things, have been engaged in things, to tell more completely what is going on.
Jeffrey Sachs, world-renowned economist and best-selling author, thank you so much for your time today.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.
And thank you for tuning in today. If you watched this video until the very end, please take a few more moments to support our crowdfunding campaign. We are an independent and non-profit journalistic media outlet that does not take any money from corporations or governments. We don't even allow advertisement, all with the goal of providing you with information that is free from any external influence. You will find the links to all of our donation platforms in the description of this video. We thank you for tuning in and for your support. I'm your host Zain Raza. See you next time.